Oh, I spoke over it. I ruined it.
non-alcoholic Copperberg strawberry lime.
That's just juice, is what that is. My kids would love that.
Oh, it is juice. It's quickly gone, and I'll give a quick calm around of
Oh yeah,
the new
absolutely.
conservatory settings,
Give us a
um,
tour.
because this podcast represents my first house party. So
Woo!
um,
I'm the first
uh,
visitor, virtual visitor to the gaff.
yes, indeed, first non-family member. We got a bit of
Wow.
sort of between the planes condensation. We got an airplane flying in.
Oh yeah. Cool. There you go. Yeah, I like it out there. It's nice. Hopefully it works out for you.
Yeah, yeah, I'm feeling like a fresh start sort of thing already. Yeah,
Yeah, good
a
stuff. Good stuff.
lovely time. Hollywood.
I know I didn't quite get to the end of my notes. Events overtook me slightly, but I feel slightly more prepared than usual. This is my ancient Android tablet that I read the books on, which is, I think, on the verge of becoming the property of one of my daughters.
Carrying it about for days in my bag. Just haven't read it, haven't made all this of the annotations and the mental notes, but I just couldn't let go of it. So that's
Good sign.
yeah.
John, will we crack on? Half eight? We just go
David,
for it?
formal
Yeah,
welcome to I've never read Discord.
oh,
I'm
we're
Andrew
recording?
Luke.
Oh my goodness. Sorry, start again. Sorry, I wasn't prepared. I was expecting the button to be pushed, but it's already been pushed. Okay.
Welcome to I've never
Sorry, it's my fault.
right. Welcome to I've never read Discord. I'm Andrew Luke. I have not read much Discworld. I'm PJ Hearts. Who you not here?
Hello. Yes, I have read almost all of Discworld. We are now book two into the Watch series, which is my most read series of Discworld. So we're going to have lots of fun with that today. Andy, would you like to introduce the book?
Yes, Men at Arms, 1993, Victor Galland. Yeah,
Finally in 1993. I feel like we were in 1992 forever. Like, how many books were there in 1992? It was a lot.
I think there were probably only two, but 93 is Terry's only Men at Arms is the only 93 book.
Oh, he's slowing down here at long last.
I'm sure if we go
Um,
back to like 94, it'd be like six or seven books.
he was certainly prolific, yeah. And as we've mentioned a couple of times, this stretch of books is a real treat, and we had lots of nice things to say about lords and ladies. But I think reading between the lines, people could probably tell I was impatient. I have probably been for several books to get back to the City Watch, and I'm really, really keen to hear Andy's take, his first impressions on this, because Guards, as much as I'd love it, it's still the first book of a series, and there's always a bit of bedding in, a bit of figuring out what works, especially with the character dynamics and stuff. So now we're in book two of the City Watch series. Things are settling in slightly, and yeah, let's get some first impressions from Andy.
Spot on. Yeah, it was Guards. I knew I was going to love it. Um, Maybe not as much as Guards, but
Oh, okay.
there's an awful lot going on in here. A lot of really just magnetic stuff.
Mm.
Um, do you know, like, I think this is the only book that hasn't said it's the funniest book ever, but I was already in for, well, probably before I got to the book, but the introductory page on my copy has quotes, and there's one from my favorite comedian, Mark Thomas,
Oh yeah.
writing in the Mail on Sunday. Um, Pratchett is a moralist, a philosopher, and a humanist whose infectious fun completely engulfs you. He leaves you thinking that not only has he accurately reflected your world, but that the world would be a better place if it could somehow reflect his. Um,
That's really, really good summation. And I think it's also really indicative of like if that quote is from the time, assuming you've got a version of this book that's published in the 90s, just by looking at it, if anybody on the video can see it, it's really interesting to me but it's great that like that Mark is picking up on that at this stage in the series. I sometimes feel that like there's that appraisal of Pratchett didn't really come to the forefront until maybe a bit later in his life, but it's good to know that like the discourse at this time in even in the early and mid 90s was already kind of seeing how prescient his reflection of our society was, you know?
I had to go and check actually because turns out there's about at least two Mark Thomases associated with Pratchett in some form or other. But
Okay.
it lines up. This is Mark Thomas, political activist, just prior to maybe about 5 years prior to his Mark Thomas comedy product show on Channel 4, which was a massive inspiration for me.
Awesome.
Mark also went on, I think in about 96, did a this I think I can't remember the title, but let's say it's called Discworld CD-ROM, where he maybe interviews Terry,
Oh.
talks to a bunch of other people. So he's like the link man,
Yeah, okay. So he was plugged in already. He was already kind of, yeah, ahead of his time in terms of getting on board the Discworld train. That's awesome, and it's great, you know, to find all those little links. And I think as we kind of discovered, uh, you know, there is that kind of little community around, you know, you'd seen names crop up in terms of like the biographers and the playwrights and the other people who are kind of involved in taking Discworld out into the world. So that's awesome. Yeah, I was trying to think back. I was thinking back to the first time I read this, and I'm pretty sure I picked it up like straight after Guards the first time. So I would have read it quite young, and I am fairly certain I read it before I read Moving Pictures. So certain character things, certain things I would have missed out on in terms of some of the reference and stuff. And I think possibly as a result of that, I might have only reread it once, which is would have been when I got my hands on the omnibus, the first three watch books. And I've probably kind of slept on it a little bit since then because I was still quite young even when I got that omnibus. And just reflecting back on it now, it just feels to me that there's like so much stuff in it that's specifically relevant to us, you know, in terms of Northern Ireland, like just
yeah.
things like representation in policing, the fetishization of firearms, political violence, literal pack mentality is in there, you know, that kind of political groupthink, the power of demagoguey, like all that stuff just feels so prescient and so relevant to like our specific experience. And, you know, reading that stuff as a kid, like even if it was subconscious, like I like to think that it was like kind of an inoculation, perhaps, against just all the nonsense and all the like negative kind of influences that would have been like really prevalent in our society, you know, around this time, the early to mid to late 90s. And yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that clicked with me after I read one of the later watch books, which we'll obviously wait to discuss that when we get there. But I think actually on rereading this one, I can really see the foundations of that stuff just being laid here, just in terms of like basically like Mark says in that quote, I guess, like what Terry aspires, like what he thinks society should be, and then like looking at what our society was, especially at that time, it was very much not that. So
I should say for contrast now to completely demolish Mark's and your own very keen thought and almost poetry in your commentary. There's also a quote from OK Magazine,
of course, well,
the
you
other end
know,
of the spectrum. Um,
I
yeah,
wonder how. I wonder. I would love to know how what the Venn diagram between OK Magazine readers and Discworld readers is. It's obviously not zero. The lines must touch, otherwise that
yeah,
quote wouldn't
right.
exist. That's awesome. I love that. What is the quote? Give me the quote
Yeah,
from
I should
OK
read that
Magazine.
for balance.
Yeah,
Right.
please do.
Yes, OK Magazine. OK Magazine says try Terry Pratchett. With his books appealing to a wide age group and both genders, he's become something of a publishing legend. His work can be described as Lord of the Rings with a touch of Monty Python. The Pratchett magic can turn dragon dung into gold, and there aren't many books you can buy which would be enjoyed by a 14-year-old computer worshipping cynic, as well as a mother and father. That's some good writing. I'm in total agreement with
I
that.
have to say, yeah, that they kind of nail it. Like, you know, OK Magazine, you know, maybe this is back in the 90s, this is back in the golden age of journalism, though, where like even the OK Magazine reviewers really knew their stuff. Fair
That was
play.
probably Mark Steele was probably writing for OK Magazine at that
Yeah,
point.
that, yeah, don't let him hear you say that. Awesome. So, shall we dive in?
Yeah, yeah.
So, part one of five, which Andy has subtitled Diversity. Vimes contemplates his retirement and marriage, also contemplated by Veterinary, as the Night Watch administer the oath to new recruits and their final challenge, a riot in Short Street. Gasboat learns Angwa's secret, an explosion on Filigree Street, and Vimes' suspicions are raised by Dr. Cruces. I'm saying that Cruces. How are you saying it?
Yeah, I'm saying Cruises too.
Good to know. Good to know. Well, we reveal the body count. I think we will. And he's kept tabs of the body count throughout this. Was because it's a crime thriller, right? You know, it's a cop story. People are gonna have to unfortunately bite it. The body count in this section: Beano the Clown, Chubby the Dragon, and Edward de Eth.
And
Which, sorry, just to go
okay,
straight in on that because we'll have to address it. We might as well address it straight away. I checked the annotated Discworld, and de Eth is a real name.
ooh,
Yeah, like one of the old families that came over with William the Conqueror, apparently. So like old Norman name. Because otherwise you just wouldn't get away with using that name if it wasn't real. If you didn't have some sort of historical accuracy to stand over, like, would you?
I get the feeling I'd seen it as well. I wondered, was it a gaming usage? But I think definitely in a DC or maybe Marvel comic.
Could well believe that, yeah.
The
So
body count's quite shocking in this book. I mean,
true.
take the first three characters in part one of five, and they're all quite lively characters. Diath is driving the plot. You really feel it when Beano goes down, and Chubby,
Yeah,
of the little we knew him,
indeed. And
kind
the
of
reveal of
shocking
like,
with very short paragraphs.
yeah, it's interesting because especially how because you're led to believe quite strongly, quite quickly that Edward is going to be the kind of the main antagonist in this, and he's going to be behind everything, and he's the one who's like he has this idea, he has access to the gun, and he's going to make things happen. And it's really interesting that it goes sideways. It feels like a bit of a smoosh of like the guards antagonist arc and the moving pictures antagonist arc, where like somebody has an idea for change and it gets out of hand, but it's the idea takes on a life of its own in this, in the way that it did in moving pictures. So it feels like a lot of those
Oh
previous
yeah,
ideas are really swirling in a quite a fun way.
keen insight.
I don't know. I mean, maybe that's right, maybe it's not. It's something I sort of felt like, especially by the end, which we'll get to. We'll talk about when we get there. I sort of felt that quite strongly.
Yeah, I think it's kind of stuck on the back burner a bit. Not necessarily a bad thing, but we get that something has taken Edward Diaz's life, but we
Yeah,
don't really know what that is until the final part. I mean, the as you remarked, the invention of a gun itself is like pretty doom bringing.
mm. I can't remember what episode we were recording, but you brought it up. You were like about
That was the
asking about the
last episode,
technology
yeah.
level of Discworld, and I'd be like, no, it's crossbows. It's crossbows, just crossbows, nothing else. Crossbows and nothing else. I had to like absolutely shut down the potential for spoilers because I knew like I did sort of remember that, especially in the first act, I guess, of this book, like he's playing a bit cute with the reveal of the gun. Like what is it? It's this thing, and like the name of it, and they're all getting it wrong. I mean, did it click with you pretty quickly? Like, yeah.
No, no.
Okay.
Even after the Gone note, yeah, it took me a while.
I think, yeah, definitely on the first read, I was super confused. I think, again, as like a younger reader and stuff, I was just like, um, and again, it's one of those things where like rereading them now, I sort of feel that I missed out on the magic of that reveal a little bit by not reading it for the first time as an adult, and I definitely missed it for longer than I should have the first time. But then I had it pre-spoiled this time, so there was no kind of happy medium for me potentially on that one, um, which is a
The
shame. But
yeah,
like, yeah, and I can be on the fence sometimes about that stuff, about like a prolonged reveal for the sake of it. But I like it. I think it works here. I think the wordplay on gun and gone is good. And it helps with the kind of procedural elements with the watch trying to figure stuff out. And obviously, they have no real world experience of firearms, so it makes sense that they're completely clueless. So, trying to keep the reader in their point of view, like not letting the reader get ahead of the investigators. I think it's quite a challenge, can be quite a challenge in mysteries, and especially if the mystery revolves around something that the readers have experience of, i.e., guns, and that the characters in the book don't. So that's quite a tricky thing to pull off, and I think he does sort of make it work.
I mean, there's an element of bait and switch in this mystery,
Yeah.
which actually should not really work in my story logic. So, the recruitment, the whole police academy thing, and that should make it more likely to detect the perpetrator quicker. It actually ends up, as a reader, I found it captivated me. It took up a lot of my interest. So I guess the point is um, to distract the reader from thinking about the mystery and
Yeah,
detail.
yeah, I would agree with that. And you're right. I think as procedural storylines go, it is quite unconventional. And I mean, there are nods to tropes. Like there's a lot of references to Columbo going on, which is great. Gotta love Columbo. But at the same time, yeah, there's a lot of bait and switching going on. There's like supernatural elements kind of later on and stuff like that. So yeah, the fact that it works, I hesitate to say it's surprising because Terry obviously knows what he's doing, but like I don't think I could pull it off, put it that way. Yeah, I see. We both decided to do a big deep dive into like diversity.
Well, we can go straight into that. Let's
Yeah,
fuck
because
that
that's
out
what
of
it
the
is.
way.
It's like, I mean, and this happened, and we both did it. Andy looked into like the kind of EU UK side of it. I looked into the US side of it a little bit. Neither of us thought to mention that like I think we're possibly the only place in the world that just had like an abrupt, active affirmative action program in our local police force within the last. It was active within the last 20 years. Within I think.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh,
so
really? So, one of the things I've learned sitting in a lot of law lectures is that we used to have the up until about 97 we had the Royal Ulster Constabulary, which I think was like this was a wartime. It existed before the war here, but police force that operated in the war and had targets put on their back, and there was a fair amount of corruption involved, as you'd imagine any police force faced with that sort of circumstance. But the reformation came post Good Friday Agreement to the Police Service of Northern Ireland, PSNI, and the PSNI stand as one of the sort of greatest examples worldwide of post-conflict policing. We have a police service that's, yeah, like a beacon exemplar to other police services and how it should be done.
And part of that was when it was first formed, they had a recruitment target of 50% from each side of the community here, so the union side of the community and the national side of the community. Obviously, the old REC was very heavily unionist, and I mean that target was never met. 50% was never achieved. But even just to have that aspiration, and that target has since been dropped. But even just to have that aspiration is something that, like, when you read Men at Arms, and you're like, to us it seems like that seemed like such a crazy thing to suggest. It was like a really quite a controversial strategy at the time, but I think the political will was there at that time, to get the agreement through to make that happen, or to at least try to achieve that. So to read this book from 1993 from like an English writer who I guess is probably mostly thinking about the London Met, probably when they think, and would probably be the closest analogy for the watch, and like the diversity that was probably needed there, like the lack of diversity in police forces in England, was obviously something that was playing on his mind. Obviously, it was a big issue here as well. So, like, to put something like that out there in this book, I think is to tackle this issue in this way in this book was quite brave and quite ahead of its time, probably.
Yeah, so I'll tell you what I was doing in 93. I was doing a milk round, which I got let go of because of my
Uh,
epilepsy.
I thought you were going to say throwing
And
bricks at the RUC.
oh no, I was a good church lad. But I was working in a 24-hour film station, which when they discovered my epilepsy,
Oh shit.
was revealed I wasn't insured to work on my own. So I got my hours cut and certain conditions put in, which made it hard for me, hard for the boss who was facilitating that. So that's when I read Men at Arms. I was a bit shocked because diversity hiring wasn't much of a thing at the time it was written.
Mm. Yeah,
Certainly
certainly
not in
not here.
Northern
Yeah.
Ireland.
Yeah, or in the UK, wide, I think, as you mentioned in your notes, you know.
Yeah, so there's a little more going on. 95, you get the Disability Discrimination Act, but really more to the point, it came in with Tony Blair's premiership in
Mm.
97. Before that, the Tory government was given a choice, which they declined to implement the 1989 EU labour law. And as part of that, it had a social charter, which was all the good stuff. Workers get freedom of movement, improved conditions to work in, holiday pay, health protection, equal treatment for men and women, protection of the elderly and disabled employment. So the Tories, yeah, we won't have that. You know, evil Europe all over again. Um, so Blair came in, we did sign up to that, and the EU updates its protection in 2000. So when Men at Arms was published, work-based equality policy is not a thing. Diversity
Mm.
hiring a way off. So, from my view, I guess Terry was a very much a forward thinker in watching European politics and
Yeah,
presumably involved with the stronger unions, maybe.
yeah, maybe, yeah. I think, you know, all that drive, you know, the political will, you know, obviously you'd like to think for the most part comes bottom up. So there obviously was a desire within kind of Western European society for change there, or I guess it wouldn't have come. The other side of it that kind of got me thinking, possibly because of the like the Columbo references and stuff, you know, like with this being Terry having always half an eye on like American pop culture, when it comes to like the police procedural element of it and stuff, you know, like affirmative action would have been a thing certainly in America, in the States, sort of going back to the 1960s, JFK and stuff. So, you know, those that would have been, I guess, Terry's formative years. So I don't know like how aware people would have been about what was going on in terms of race relations in the States in the 1960s. But, you know, it was something that was definitely out there, and it was controversial and it was noisy, and obviously the president that brought it in got assassinated, like, so. Yeah, I think, yeah, even just looking west, you know, there probably was something in the air, maybe going back even 20 years or more. So I think, and when you do think about the police side of it, you know, especially now, we think about racism within the police force. Obviously, isn't an exclusively American issue, but we do probably knee-jerk reaction think of it as an American issue, you know. So yeah, it's an interesting melting pot, and like a really brave decision to try to tackle this in a funny fantasy book in the early 90s.
Without regard to race, creed, or color. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
that's
Like that,
all
and
very
that is mentioned a
convincing.
few times in Discworld, isn't it? Like there's no racism in Discworld, but there's like loads of speciesism. Speciesism, yeah.
Oh yeah, people still find excuses to be horrible to one
And
another.
they always will. I mean, like, yeah, you only have to look at, you know, outside our own front doors to see that, I guess. But
I want to talk about the new recruits before we go
oh
on.
gosh, 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 we
And
managed to
some of
just
them are old recruits as well.
talk about boring.
Detritus is back
Yes,
with
yeah,
his salute, don't salute.
love it.
And he's even more fun than I remember him being. Cuddy is great. I think even before they're partnered up in the narrative, they're a great coupling. Even before when Terry's not concentrating on that species rivalry. I mean, they're the two big new recruits. Angua, I think, is more of a slow boil. She's kind of
Yeah,
on Carrot's arm, although you do get the feeling almost right away that Gaspode is also a member of this enhanced night watch.
yeah, almost, yeah. And it's, yeah, great to see Detritus back, great to see Gaspard back, and like obviously we talked before that in first drafts of moving pictures, Gaspard was gonna buy it, like he was gonna die, and he survived. So the thought is obviously if he survives, he's gonna come back, but in what way? So pairing him up with his mirror opposite, with this like, you know, beautiful female werewolf essentially, who's everything that he's not, is is really funny. You know, like they're a great pairing. It does sort of take as you say, takes Angua slightly out of the pool of new recruits and puts her in her own separate little thing that's going on with Gaspode. But I like it. It really works for me. I agree about Cuddy and Detritus as well. Like just that big guy, little guy comedy duo, I guess. Just like the proper Laurel and Hardy kind of thing that they have going on is beautiful. It's really funny. And I wondered did that feels like it came quite naturally. Like I think that pairing where they go off and have their own little adventure together. I'd be curious to know how planned that was, or whether he just loved writing them together so much that they ended up kind of on a little side quest, you know.
I think Carrot and Ango work quite well. There's that romance is well paced and quite believable. I was a little sort of after my love for the original crew, I felt a bit that they were shunted a little to the side. I mean, this book is very much about Vimes, but we don't get an awful lot of them. It's kind of
Mm.
it's Carrot is again the central character, and it does so much more to enhance the Carrot story. It's very much a Guards sequel directly in that sense.
Yes, agreed. And I do wonder, you know, thinking back to Lords and Ladies, whether he is exploring, like, if he's going to keep these series going, if he's going to do more witches books, does he need to mix up the lineup? You know, because we saw in that book about how Mygrat was potentially going to leave the coven and all that stuff, and then something similar is happening here with Vimes, where like, you know, Mygrat goes off to become queen, and then Vimes is going to go off and become a lord or whatever he gets by marrying Sybil, and
Lord Vimes.
yeah, and then well he gets knighted at the end, I guess, doesn't he? So
I
yeah,
almost
so yeah,
out my cider. It's
oh
true.
yeah, so
Sir Vimes.
yeah, so the fact that there's sort of similar arcs at play there, and obviously they end differently, but the fact that we saw what happened with Mygrat in the last book, if you were reading these books in publication order, you'd be like, well, if Mygrat can stop being a witch, Vimes can definitely stop being a guard. So, like you say, the focus being on Carrot, on the new recruits, I think maybe leads the audience to believe that that might actually be happening, that like Vimes is actually maybe gonna retire. So yeah, so I think yeah, there's compromise there. You end up with less of him as a result of that. I don't mind so much. I guess I don't mind maybe just because I've read so much Discworld and so much City Watch book in particular that like I've I've I'll never miss Vimes. You know, I've had my fill of Vimes. I haven't had my fill of Vimes, but he's always kind of there. So like if he's takes a slight backseat for one book like that, that's okay. That's in the grand scheme of things is fine.
Right, now we can go on to part two.
Terribly sorry.
I've titled this Gone. Warned away from the assassins by the patrician, Vimes enters high society. Anger's tongue is hanging out. Body count: Bjorn Hammerhawk, Arthur the Dummy, Bundo Prong by Armadillo. Vimes,
Forgot about that actually.
that one up. Vimes and Carrot find a bullet in Hammerhawk's workshop. Cuddy and Detritus call to the Alchemist Guild and a deadly game of pool. At Bino's funeral, Colon and Nobby find Dr. Whiteface uncooperative, but they have a whistleblower.
Per Bjorn. I felt less bad
Yeah.
about the others, but like I think what's really interesting about that whole business, I know I'm jumping ahead slightly, but just because he's the first name on the body count, is like I love how connected Carrot still is to dwarf culture and dwarf society, and that really, even though it is a little bit of I was about to say white saviorism, but it would be human saviorism in this context. That like we have to see that culture through a human's eyes, because it's so removed from reality. It doesn't actually matter, you know. Like dwarves aren't real, this world's not real. But it makes Carrot. It just makes you so on his side all the time. You know, just seeing how much he cares about all that stuff and how genuine he is about it. Yeah, it always makes me smile.
He is a natural leader. It's pretty easy by which you let go of your loyalty to Colon and just like let Carrot do the job because it's what he can do well. It's only, I think, much later in the book, in the last part, where it becomes annoying because it's been happening so many times.
Yeah, absolutely. Um,
But that's just the right place for it to become annoying.
Yeah, and given the arc the card's going to go on here in terms of the all the king stuff, I think it all makes sense. You know, the groundwork is laid quite well. and all the kind of assassin stuff. Like, you know, we've it always sort of surprises me on this reread, like how keen Terry is to go back to the assassins and to flesh them out. Like we spent quite a lot of time inside the Assassins Guild between, you know, pyramids and this. Yeah, I'm curious as to. I mean, they're a great story engine, I suppose, and they're such obvious villains. Um, that maybe that's the reason for it. And
I seen rifles in it. Oh, pun.
yeah, see what he did there. And yeah, if we're gonna have if it's a story about weaponry and new weaponry, they obviously earn their place in it massively. Where was I going with
You
that?
had in your notes this was kind of like a moving pictures
Yeah, I wrote that down. I thought that was really clever, and then I was like, I
narration.
don't actually know if that's right or not. But I did sort of feel on this read, having done it in the right order this time, and maybe it's just because I read it so badly out of order last time that this time it did feel almost like a semi-sequel to Moving Pictures as much as a Guards one, you know, because you've got Gaspard, you've got Detritus, Silverfish even pops
Silverfish,
up in this
yeah.
section, and
The yeah,
well,
maybe the Jack Kirby to cut my own throat, Stanley.
yeah, yeah, well, yeah, good to see. Yeah, good, yeah, that. Well, he based on? He's based on Goldwyn, I think, of Goldwyn and
Golden
Meyer,
Memory.
if I remember correctly. Uh, which I think their relationship was pretty similar to Kirby and Stanley. But the thing that sort of drove that home for me was that there seems to be like thematic carryover as well. I sort of touched on it already, but like all this kind of hard-boiled detective kind of cop stuff like is straight out of the movies, isn't it? And there's like overt Columbo references as we mentioned, and but just the idea of the gun, you know, like the idea of the cinema, you know, is a big dangerous idea that has a life of its own, and I think that's the really tangible thematic connection to moving pictures. But that's giving the game away slightly at this stage. But I
Yeah,
wasn't
yeah.
necessarily expecting it to go there at this
You haven't
stage.
spoiled me. I've already read the book, so
Well, yes,
let's see if
since
this time round.
everybody listening has already read the book, let's
Yeah,
hope so.
I get that there's a lot of even in this part, there's a lot of feeling of procedural. There's you know, checking out the pool hall who squawks at that. There's showing up at the funeral
Yeah, yeah,
asking
yeah,
questions, which albeit is an accidental thing, but
yeah.
it's got the feeling like you know, you might sort of see Jessica Fletcher contrived to sort of appear at somebody's funeral,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
completely oblivious to, oh, I didn't know the funeral was happening. And
Yeah, we should have done
um,
up like
yeah, that's not
uh
going to win me many fans.
oh man, like people love Murder She Wrote. We
I
should.
actually, Joe Michael Straczynski was one of the main scripters of Murder She Wrote, so
See,
it's not
there you go.
completely out of
Yeah,
the Pratchett ballpark.
absolutely. Don't turn your nose up at that. We should have done a bingo card for all these tropes,
Pratchett,
but like
Gaiman, Straczynski. There you go. There's your.
totally all in the same wheelhouse. But yeah, you've got so many great tropes in this bit. You're right. We're in deep procedural territory here. We've got the patrician, the mayor, you know, warning them of the case. You stay away from that case, vibes.
And I'm loving Veterinary in this book. He is
Yeah.
all over it. I think he's probably in every of our fifths.
Yeah, a bit more so than in Guards. I think they were playing with like including him a bit more as a character, and yeah, he's definitely more present here. Uh, what other tropes were in this? Oh yeah, there's a Columbo. Oh, just one more thing on the way out of the Assassin's Guild.
Yeah,
Totally slipped my mind. Yeah, you
Albert
got the turn up,
Spine's getting
turn it.
the
Yeah,
notes with the Gonne. I'm not
uh,
sure how solid that is structurally as a plot thing, but I don't really want to poke at it. It's kind of hard being a critic of
mm,
something that you really enjoy and you keep
yeah.
finding flaws in it and prodding it to look for the weak parts when you've just had a perfectly satisfying experience. And
Yeah, and you know, like I'm really the first to jump at like poking at structure and stuff. I mean, it's part of what I do for a living, so I can't help myself. But I really don't mind it in this book at all. Like the procedural isn't like this by the numbers, you know, beat mystery storyline. Like it's a Discworld story first and a police procedural story second, and I think he's just got the balance of that just right. So yeah, the fact that there's like a lot of clues and a lot of procedural work is done quite quickly in this section. And then once we know what we're dealing with, which is that there's a new force in the Discworld, and it's firearms, and actually what that means for the Discworld and the characters and all this other stuff that's going on, re-diversity, etc., in the city at this moment. That's Discworld. So we've sort of piggybacked off the procedural to like get into the bigger Discworld
Right.
sort of style
And
story.
you brought me on to something I really want to talk about. The Guards book do for me already the best is give us that tour of Ankh Park
Yeah,
and really mark it out as a city. Now I know that the for sure, maybe I've been told before, but for sure, I know that the river is so stinky and stale that you can draw a chalk body on top of it. I know I have an idea of the how narrow Filigree Street is. I know the guilds back on to one another.
yeah.
Walking the beat with these guys is a great map book. Is a great
Yeah,
book.
oh, totally. And like, I think it benefits from the fact that this mental picture has sort of been slowly building up over the course of the series, I guess. And you, for those who've listened to previous episodes, have probably been able to tell that I've been really impatient to get to this point where like Ankh-Morpork is just fully realized living city, because that's the Ankh-Morpork that exists in my head, where like where I want to. Well, no, I don't think anybody wants to live there. I don't think it sounds like a very nice place to live, but it's so vivid in my imagination, and it's complete. Like that mental image is complete by the time we arrive at this book, isn't it?
Yeah, funny if I can just go off on a mini tangent. At the end of
Always.
my copy, there's an advertisement for something called The Streets of Ankh-Morpork, devised by Stephen Briggs,
Oh yeah,
assisted by Terry Pratchett. Map of the great city of Discworld. Have you come by such a
I have seen it. I don't own it. Um, is that one of the ones that actually got? Did they turn that into one of the jigsaw puzzles? I was about to buy. I did the Death Study one during the pandemic, and I was in the market for more Discworld jigsaw puzzles, and I think the Ankh-Morpork map might have been one of them. Um, so if anybody wants to buy me a birthday present in 5 weeks, your you know
Yeah.
Discworld map slash
We'll get you
jigsaw.
in the next episode. Yeah.
Yeah. See if we
Um,
can get some sponsorship going.
Streets of Ankh-Morpork. I will have to check that out. Oh, actually, just at the end of the page advertising, it says, as leading Ankh-Morpork entrepreneur, CMOT Dibbler would say, a snip at 4.99, and that's cutting our own throat.
And
Well,
those are 90s prices.
4.99. Wow. Actually, on the opposite page, there's an album of music by Dave Greenslade, from the Discworld, which I note is on Spotify and also on YouTube.
Yeah, I th I think I have listened to it, like when such things were first being passed around on physical CDs by nerds. I have no memory of it at all.
I
Like,
know I just looked at the track listing and I know there's certain pieces of music for certain books. Um,
that
it
rings a
does
big
tend to
bell.
be with the first dozen, I think. So I'm intrigued by that. Um, no, we should really get back to
We should. Before we do, would you like to know how much a copy of The Streets of Ankh-Morpork currently costs at today's prices?
14.99,
Pretty close, 16.99.
16.99.
So there you go. But it looks great. It's cool. Yeah. Wonder how big it is. No, right. Yes. Back to work. So section three, fireworks. Vimes comes under fire. Carrot and Angwa's first date is a meal, a museum, and a murder investigation. Dwarf cop, troll cop, facing death in the Pork Futures warehouse in Quarry Lane, and in the sewers of Old Ankmore Park. Body count, lettuce nibs. Itinerary has a chat with Leonard of Quirm. The patrician takes Vimes' sword and stands down the night watch. No sooner than his post-boost clutching coffee. Quirk of the day watch arrests Coalface for the murders, causing riots to break out. So yeah,
Mid book acceleration here.
yep, good escalation. And we did slightly blow past the first confrontation between the trolls and the dwarfs, which I think happens in the last section, where basically, yeah, riot's about to happen. Carrot diffuses it because he's Carrot, and Detritus and Cuddy, that's kind of part of their racial tension that's simmering under the surface. And then things really kind of kick off the back of that with all this kind of stuff. So I love that. That's straight out of a noir right there. Carrot and Angwa's first date is a meal, a museum, and a murder investigation. That's awesome.
I wonder,
Um,
did Terry just start that with that maybe the use that line, right?
yeah, yeah,
Because that's perfect.
absolutely.
That's
And like,
that's plotting that you want.
yeah, and something that I never questioned because I read these books so quickly and so voraciously at the time, and quite a lot of it went over my head. But like, it was probably a relatively big swing to try and do a love interest for Carrot. You know, considering how set up he is set up as quite simple and quite pure, and to make him like a little bit wary of the undead as well. Like he does have his own prejudices, and then he's going to end up in a physical relationship with Anguid during the course of this book. Like, you know, it would have been perfectly acceptable. I don't think there would have been any criticism if he had decided not to flesh Carrot out to that extent. But like this book in particular, and try not to say anything about the future books, but this book in particular is so much better for that because of the journey that Carrot's going to go on as a result, you know.
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about a carrot date, that pretty much is a carrot date. Like that's
Oh,
um,
totally.
an extension or
The museums
projection of who
especially.
he is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, even I guess that it's an idea. If that popped into your head, like what would Carrot be like on a date? You couldn't not write it. You would have to write it.
and
Yeah.
I mean, this is he could have left the romance aspect out, but I think this is a solid commitment that he's going to write this carrot book here. Um, and
Yeah.
yeah, it really worked for me.
Good. I'm
I mean,
so
I
glad.
don't think they're the cutest couple ever, but yeah,
Yeah, give it time.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, give it time.
The Discworld moved for him is an amazing line.
Yeah. Oh, well, yes, indeed. So I notice here, I was making my notes as I go. I should wait till the end, but I was making notes as I go, and at the time, I was doing my usual thing where I was like, "Oh, there's maybe a little bit too much going on in this section," which is like, you know, if there was a drinking game associated with this podcast, it would have to be every time I say that there's a little bit too much going on. And I was concerned that the midsection possibly was struggling under the weight of just maybe a strand or two too many, you know, just in terms of like Vimes retiring and moving up, you know, all those characters, all the like high society characters were introduced, all the characters associated with the ethnic strife, you know, Coalface, the strong in the arm, dwarf, all that stuff. And then all of a sudden there's another captain in the watch, Captain Kirk. Ah, see what he did there? Oh man, didn't get that before. Captain
Oh,
Kirk. Oh, cool. There's so many layers, man. Um, so there's like a lot of new characters, I guess, floating around, and we even get the first appearance of Philo Ron. Like he's in the mix as well, like all this stuff. But when I finished it and I got to the end of the book and I got thinking about whether this was a procedural, crime procedural, or whether it was something else. And that's when it sort of clicked with me what I was saying before about it being a Discworld book that kind of leaps off the back of a procedural. So I actually, this is where that transition happens, and I actually think, considering how it wraps up, it works. And again, drinking game number two. Who am I to question? The mighty Terry Pratchett.
I
So
I didn't feel there was too much heavy lifting at all.
good. I'm so glad.
Only
Yeah.
only when I got well saddled myself rather than asked for volunteers with writing these synopses. Um, that
Yeah.
I thought
Sorry.
I hope
Someday.
I can fit the Cuddy and detritus bits in together, but then I became aware there's so much else in this block, and I had to narrow it down again and again. I mean, it kicks off with Vimes on the run being shot at. Like, is he like leaping over rooftops and like charging down buildings? I mean, it's proper action thriller,
Yeah. It's a chase sequence. It's
prime
like a.
time stuff. I can see the why. Um, if there's any relation between that and the Netflix series, I can see it because the guard stuff
Oh, the BBC
lends
series.
itself.
Uh, it would be generous to say that there is. Like
Well, well, you know which two writers to hire to do that sort of thing.
good.
Hello.
Yeah. I think anybody who's read my lengthy posts about it on Reddit will know that they will never hire me. They'll never hire me to touch that now. Yeah, I'm glad actually that you mentioned that the Pork Futures warehouse thing, like that, thinking about like sequences from this book that left an impression on me as a young reader, like that idea that trolls are silicon based, computers are silicon based, computers run
Yeah.
faster when they're cold, so trolls run faster when they're cold. That was mind blowing. That felt like such great imagination because it's such high fantasy, but it's so grounded in the world that we know. And again, not to beat that drum too hard, but again, that's always been the magic of Discworld for me.
Well, it knots together. We had this in, was it The Light Fantastic? That rocks, trolls are computers.
Yeah, with the stones in
Um,
the sky and
it
stuff. Yeah,
knots that, and the later portrayal of them as not the smartest creatures. Yeah, it's a delicious through line.
yeah, yeah. It's
Um,
an idea that that you're right that he has been noodling with, but like this was the first time on my sequential crazy out of order reading. I think all that stuff in Light Fantastic when I first read it in the graphic novel, I don't think I really got it. Oh, and then when I read it here, it clicked. I think I started to dabble with computers and stuff myself by this point, and was less just like mind blown by it. So
um,
cool.
and you get Cuddy and Detritus. They're down in the cold, and then above the streets, and then they're under Ankh-Morpork and old Ankh-Morpork. So you get, and although they stop in the middle and almost check in, I think it's very brief. Um, you get that sort of up above, down below sort of investigation,
Yeah,
and they're fucking great. They're a really,
yeah.
really great duo.
Such a fun sequence. Yeah, and then sort of knowing, I couldn't quite remember, but I was reading it going like, man, I don't remember Cuddy appearing in many of those later books. Like, does he die in this? Shit, I think he dies in this.
I spoiled
And
it for myself. I went
oh
to,
no.
well, not entirely, but I was trying to remember who I knew. Um, and I think it was Leonard of Quirm. Actually, did I know him from another book? And I know he's been
Mm,
mentioned. I wondered, was he in Eric? So I went and Googled him and few appearances. And Angua, I couldn't remember, but I saw she was in lots of other books.
yeah, yeah.
Sorry, I've spoiled it for you, but PJ does it all the time. And
Yeah,
then
oh yeah, yeah. It's
I
nice for
looked at
somebody else to
Cuddy.
slip up for a change.
I looked at Cuddy, and it was just this book, and I was like, "Yeah,
That's a
that's
shame.
not right.
Yeah,
Something's amiss there." So
I know.
yeah,
Such a
it
shame.
was
But
still a
like,
shock when it was revealed. Like,
yeah, well, yeah, we'll
we'll
get
get
there.
to
But
that. Yeah,
I guess in terms of there being the tropes again of the genre of the cop genre that like it's a buddy cop duo. They're the buddy cops. So one of the duo has to bite it. That's not as much of a trope as it used to be, I suppose. But like,
and they
audiences have
really
gone
are
soft.
buddy cops. I mean,
Yeah,
Cuddy has no respect for detritus to begin with, and comes around to where he really gives two F's about him. He really cares about the guy, and it develops nicely in the next part where he makes this cool down helmet for him, and
yeah,
um,
yeah. It's so sweet. I can't remember if we talked about this in Lords and Ladies. I have a feeling that I made a conscious effort to hold off on it, but I can't remember if I succeeded or not in terms of talking about Millennium Hand and Shrimp. Did we talk about that yet?
no, I don't think we did.
So, Philo Ron, who we first meet here, uh, he's like a crazy beggar and he has his little catchphrase, Bugger Millennium Hand and Shrimp. And actually, the first time that exact phrase, even though it sounds like it's just gobbledygook, the first time we hear it is actually in Lords and Ladies, when the Bursar is having one of his episodes.
The first are talking a lot of gobbledygook.
Exactly, yeah. And apparently, so there's a story behind it. I can't remember if Mark mentioned it at his book talk, but Terry apparently had this old computer program, which he says he thinks was called Babel or something like that, and he used to feed it um, like song lyrics and Chinese takeaway menus and just like random words, and then the software would try to generate phrases based on his input, and that's one of them apparently that came out, and that becomes this recurring catchphrase. Anytime anybody goes mental in Discworld, that's kind of what they say, and then it sort of morphs into follow Ron's kind of catchphrase. So yeah, I couldn't remember if we mentioned that. So yeah, so there's a They Might Be Giants song and a Chinese takeaway menu, and they seem to be the two things that people have identified as potentially the origin of Millennium Hand and Shrimp. I can tell, having only encountered it in Lords and Ladies and Men at Arms. He's looking at me bemused. He's like, "This means nothing. Like, what are you talking about, man?" But I promise you, people who are listening who have read more Discworld know that this is a recurring thing,
Okay,
and they might
PJ
be
started to
interested
make
in the
sense
origin
in
of it.
any moment.
No, this is gonna get cut. This is for later. It's fine. It's totally
Well,
fine.
um,
Okay, Clutchy and coffee. Let's talk about
well,
Clutchy
no,
and coffee.
what is Particle Man? Particle Man?
Yeah, that's the song. That's
Um,
They Might Be Giant song that Terry fed into the software.
oh, right. I thought this was a Terry thing, and this went into Babel, so it might have they might be
Yeah,
convinced might have helped create
yeah. Well, it has the
the
words millennium in it. It has the words hand in it, and then but shrimp. You see, I mean, we know. I don't know if this story is.
Okay,
If it,
we're not gonna get a copyright strike if I read this out. Universe man, size of the entire universe man, usually kind to smaller men, universe man. He's got a watch with a minute hand, a millennium hand, and an eon hand. When they meet, it's happy land. Powerful man, universe man.
it's pretty bang on. Um,
See ChatGPT come up with something as good as that.
I know, right? Bring back 90s ska bands. That's what I say. Um, so yeah, that I would say people who probably know enough about Discworld to care about this probably know this story already, but I find it quite fascinating. Um, the other kind of pop culture reference in this that always kind of sparks a memory and makes me laugh is the whole Clutchy and coffee sequence.
Oh, how so?
It reminds me of an episode of Red Dwarf where they're in virtual reality. It's like the virtual reality Western
With the
thing.
mice. Yeah.
Yeah, and Crichton gets so drunk. Is it Crichton or Lister gets so drunk that they feed him a bowl of raw coffee beans and he's just eating it like cereal? Do you remember that?
Very vaguely.
Yeah, but for some reason that image is like etched in my head for this sequence. Like in my sequence, and I know in the book, like it's written that he's drinking the Clutchy coffee, but in my head, he's eating it with a spoon, like in Red Dwarf. I don't know why, it just makes me laugh.
So about the time Terry would have been writing this, Twin Peaks was airing on television, which I used to watch with my mother religiously. And from that day, from that point on, I became a full-blown coffee addict. I could give up smoking cigarettes easier than giving up coffee. I could give up crack cocaine, which I do an awful lot of,
I can
easier
tell.
than coffee. And I do like a bit of the harder stuff, like from time to time, just to really. I mean, Terry has a wonderful description he's giving to the guards of like pulling vines like through one part of the universe and out the other, with
The
the
idea of going
worry
through,
that
yeah, the
something
idea of
might go
going through
wrong.
sobriety and coming out the other side is very memorable. Yeah, well, I mean, I would just want to show some solidarity and say that I also have very hopeless coffee addiction. The best wedding present I received was a proper full-scale bean to cup DeLonghi coffee machine, which still probably, so we got married, what, 8 years ago, and it still generates at least 2 pints, maybe 3 pints of coffee per day.
Future
And
episode in PJ's house.
yeah,
Yeah,
again,
that.
fishing for sponsorship and birthday presents here. Any DeLonghi coffee accessories, always
Um,
welcome. But
Good
yeah, and I
neighbors
think
are only a taxi away.
good point. Yeah,
We've got an awful lot more stuff in this. We've got lettuce nibs. Uh,
yeah, the Beggars Guild,
and
first
that hit me.
appearance of.
I was really saddened by that.
Mm. And I think something we haven't talked about so much yet that it does start to kind of permeate the book maybe a bit more strongly at this point is that like the fetishization or what Terry has to say about the fetishization of firearms and of violence, I suppose. And Yeah, so the fact that you had this really cool, really dynamic chase scene with Vimes, previous section, and that's like nice, page turning pulp actiony type stuff, resulted in death of an innocent bystander, and that gets dwelt on and becomes part of the story in this section. And I mean, you can tell that Terry's really down on the idea of guns and gun violence. Like this book wouldn't exist otherwise. And yeah, the fact that you feel bad then for enjoying that section a little bit. We're like, oh, that was cool. That whole chase sequence, people were shooting
Right?
at Vine.
Did she fall as a direct consequence of that?
Is that not the implication that it's kind of like it's ricochet, or it's like the bullets that were fired up that missed Vimes, like one of them ended
I
up.
think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's my reading of it. And again, prove me wrong, kids. Write in and tell me if I'm wrong. But and maybe I'm reaching for something that's not there. But
I
I
think
do.
you might be right. It's not overly stated though. There's
But
not
why? But
not
where
quite
else? I mean,
storing about that plot point.
yeah. So
So there's very much a sort of a speaking out and reacting against America. I think that's even more fuel for that argument.
yeah, potentially, yeah. And I mean, it's pre-Dunblane, so like gun ownership in the UK would have been a bit higher as well. Gun ownership in Northern Ireland was significantly higher, 1993.
Yeah, we've still got a few.
So,
Sorry, it's terrible.
tight, tight
Yes.
side. Um, yeah. So, but yeah, the consequences of all this,
Yeah, right.
potential consequences for innocent people, I think it's really important for him to remark on at this point. Uh, cool.
We
I'm,
get veterinary has Leonard Decorum in the basement.
so,
I
sorry,
don't have a
this is the
basement.
first physical appearance of Leonard, right? This is the first time.
I think possibly he's certainly been mentioned before.
Yeah, but we haven't
Um,
like. So again, I've always been wary of talking about him too much because it's like, how much of him have we
but
seen? How much about him do we know?
certainly the first close up we get.
Yeah, yeah. So it's the
First
first time
appearance.
he appears in a scene as a person rather than just like as.
This is your area of research, but frankly, I have read some Discworld, so I'm
Yeah.
going to
But it's so much straighter in your head because you've actually read it in the right order as a grown up.
okay,
Like you actually know about this stuff now much better than I do.
that's a fair ask. Now, if I spend too long on this page, pull me out because
Oh
there's
shit!
always
No, don't, no,
spoilers.
don't
You
risk
can
the
be
spoilers.
you can be the Dean Stockwell to my Scott Bakula. Uh,
Uh, there's a reference for you.
it doesn't. It does tell me a future book he's in. It doesn't tell me the first appearance. Curse you, Discworld fandom wiki. I should have went to Elspace, which is next.
Elspeth's
My
always the
list.
way. Always go to Elspeth.
Um,
So,
doesn't give
mention
me
in
the
Weird
first
Sisters
appearance.
appears in Men of Arms. I don't think he physically
Oh yeah,
appears in Weird
no.
Sisters. So, yeah, I don't know why. It's not actually that important. But yeah, anyway, when I picture Leonard of Quirm, like I picture him in this book, like in the dungeon, like held captive, I guess, by the, but quite happy to be so. He's just like in his own world, tinkering with stuff. Um, and obviously the Leonardo da Vinci references are like extremely overt, but quite funny then as a result.
So the line that sticks with me here is that what's the line? That he's as something like as much as anybody like Leonard de Quirm of Quirm could be a prisoner.
Yeah,
And you
because he's
get
always like in his imagination.
and
Yeah.
he's got like veterinary, it's implied veterinary lets him have the run of the place, but he just is happy in his downstairs dwellings. And this is kind of the closest, seems to be the closest also veterinary has to a friend.
Yeah, that's an interesting
Um,
one and not something I don't think I would have picked up on the first time round. But yeah, because they both have such unusual perspectives, I guess, on the world. That who else is there for either of these guys? I think yeah, there's something a little bit sweet in that. A really nice way of just introducing things like this to Discworld, where like anytime some modern technology leaks into Discworld, Leonard did it. Like, and it totally works as well.
yeah.
Uh, and I know there are. I could probably check annotated Discworld, but I think it's this idea of the gun just being kind of like scribbled offhand in the margins of something else is, I think, a reference to Leonardo da Vinci sort of absent-mindedly designing a tank, I think. And then just being like, well, that's an idea that could like, cause absolutely world-changing loss of life, but it's just like scribbled in the margins of something
Well,
else.
he was the inventor of Batman and wrote several Paul Simon songs. So, yeah.
Sure. Yep.
Have we anything else to say about part three? Maybe about Quirk or Cope?
Yeah, I mean, Quirk's like very much a non-entity, but I think by design, isn't he? You know, what do they call him? Mayonnaise. I can't remember what the in-universe explanation for
Yeah.
that nickname is, but like the mental image of that person and that it puts in your mind is very Dickensian, I guess, isn't it? He's just like he's the path of least resistance kind of guy. He's as tough as mayonnaise. Um, so
I can't help thinking like he would make a very interesting return foil for Vimes, except he's dead now, isn't he?
does he
Can
get killed?
Terry kill him in this? Actually, it would have been in the body count, but his second takes over at some point, so maybe not. Hmm.
Again, it just shows you like how, I mean, inconsequential is not quite the right word, but like there's a very distinct line drawn between the Night Watch, who we're on board with, and the Day Watch, who I don't know if there's like a police trope, like a crime trope kind of equivalent for these guys. Like they don't feel like they're not like the
Do you know what feels
internal
very much
affairs
like
as such.
a class system? Uh,
Yeah,
you might watch, I suppose, as the underdogs, the maybe not proper police.
yeah, and it's something I guess that
Yeah, it's
it's
very
touched
much
on.
all over guards that they're not certainly not what they once were 100, 200 years ago in Ankh Park.
Yeah, and the likes of Quirk are the guys who are just happy to tread that path of least resistance. They're the cops who aren't necessarily corrupt, but they're not necessarily giving it their all either, and that I think Terry is interested in what makes good police, and he touches on it a little bit in Guards and touches on it a little bit here as well, but like I think he's still noodling with it. I mean, it's not too much of a spoiler at all to say that it's going to come up again later because you know that there's plenty more City Watch books. So yeah, I think starting to noodle a bit more strongly with those ideas in the likes of characters like Quirk.
Conscripted. An attack on the watch house leads Carrot to form a city militia. They defuse a riot over Coalface's incarceration. With new arms, they bluff their way to inspect a fool's guild and find a hole in the wall and a room full of eggs.
Love this. The militia, I remember that really took me as a surprise. First time I read this book, it felt like a really big step. But actually, looking back and like, again, not to go on about this or whatever, but like when we were kids, like there was a lot of riots. Like riots weren't like, weren't like a big deal, right? Like if there was a riot, it meant that there were traffic diversions or whatever the next morning. So the idea that like, oh, there's a riot in the city, so like everything shuts down and the police are disbanded and there's and you're like, that's not what happens when there's a riot. Like from our life experience, but like, now that we're more worldly and we've seen things outside of Northern Ireland, we know that that's not normal. So you kind of go, oh yeah, okay, this is properly like they're overthrowing the government, and also the fact that Ankh-Morpork is a city-state and not just like a town. That like if the patrician gets overthrown, that's like the president being overthrown. That's not like it's not just like it's the mayor or something. So yeah, so this all kind of makes a bit more kind of sense in context now as an
And you've
adult.
got a little bit of character story trope where you've got the most diligent copper, the most pure white bread one is the one who decides, right, we're taking over, we're in charge of the operation now, and that I'm all there for.
So much of the tension that exists within Carrot's character is built around that because we know what we know about him in terms of his kingliness or whatever. And I guess that's yeah, just speaking about the tropes.
He's
Having the
the
what
bookman, like it's of course it's all set up that he knows it the law so well.
yeah, and that's set up as like going right back to the start of Guards. But yeah, the other piece of the kind of police procedural bingo card for this section is the fact that the patrician has stood the watch down, and that's why we were talking about Quirk, I guess. But like they've literally had to hand over their badges, but they're gonna do the job anyway. And as tropey as that is, and that he's making light of that and he's having fun with it, it actually underpins this like really significant character arc for Carrot, and that the nature of power and who should wield power and all that stuff, which again was started in Guards. So fascinating. I can't think of a lot of writers who deal with it in this way. You know, it's something that obviously does come up in all sorts of different fiction, but like I can't think of another character like Carrot. And maybe it's just because I'm not well enough read, but I just can't.
Hmm.
You know?
The only, not really, I don't, the kingly part of Carrot isn't the most interesting to me, except in a scene we'll come on to talk about later.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
In my head, I had the movie version of Dragnet, Dan Aykroyd, isn't it?
Oh yeah,
Carrot, because the very by the book officer who, at the end, snaps and decides he's gonna do things the way that they should be done. But even then, I mean, it's a bit of a step out of character. It's a character sort of snapping and
but I
saying,
think that's what's interesting
I'm
about
going
it.
off the rails. Carrot doesn't do that. Carrot
Exactly. Yeah.
has has the police lineage. I think.
Carrot is able to achieve all that, but without breaking the rules by maintaining his by the bookness because he finds the
Yes.
justification to do it in the book,
Oh,
which you know. So and again, that's all part of what makes him so unique. And I'm really, really glad that they I keep saying they like who's they? I'm really glad that Terry um didn't decide to like drag this whole Carrot King thing out over like half a dozen books, like
didn't we
you
get
know.
a bit of this set up in Guards?
Exactly. It's set
Yeah,
off in Guards, and it's pretty much all paid off here.
right.
We're not still wondering like 5 or 6 books later, oh, is Carrot gonna find out he's the king? You know, because that feels like the sort of thing, and if it was like in a Song of Ice and Fire, it wouldn't 8 books later, it wouldn't even be
Yeah,
resolved, you know.
not
So,
written yet. One
well,
of the
yeah,
things I noticed, I think from my descriptions, is I may have had to leave a bit out, and it was, well, there's probably quite a few left out, but about Vimes handing over his sword,
yeah. And
which is
again, it's a
pretty
hand in
cool.
your badge and your gun moment, isn't it?
Yeah,
You know, yeah,
yeah. And there's a lovely little bit where shortly after that, I think Veterinary, I think it might be talking to Quirk about it, and Veterinary shows his hand to the reader where, I think he says something like, I think I might have pushed him too far. And the implication is that he wanted to enrage Vimes so that
yeah.
Vimes would go off and sort things out, but he might have actually broken him.
I actually made a bookmark on that page. I very rarely, I always forget to make bookmarks, but I made a bookmark on that page. And you're right, maybe I have to move this around in the edit. But it's almost at the midpoint, in fact, 49% of the way through the book. And yeah, Vimes walks out of the patrician's office and he doesn't punch the wall. Every time he walks out of the patrician's office, he punches the wall and there's these series of dents. And then after he's handed in his badge and his sword, he walks out and Veterinary says, "Oh, it's after he." So this all happens, and then he goes on, and it's while Veterinary's talking to Leonard of Quirm, and that whole sort of half a friendship that exists between them. It comes out during their little chat, and he says, "Oh dear, pardon," said Leonard. "He didn't thump the wall. I may have gone too far." And yeah, you're right. It's him. The patrician shows his hand. He would never show his hand to anybody else except Leonard, I don't think. And it just like that's the midpoint. You just know like stuff's gonna get crazy from here on out, and like it sure does. And now, yes, one thing I will say about the whole militia thing, even though I was quite defending it there, and like found it a bit incredulous maybe the first time I read it. This time I find it a lot more credulous. But like the likes of like Coldface, for example, joining up just basically through the force of Carrot and Detritus's personality does still feel like it's a little bit too neat, maybe. If I had to be critical, I would say that.
Yeah, they're pretty much taking anyone that's going at this point, and it does.
But the fact that he would agree, like he's like obviously a crime lord, like he's a crime boss, and he just kind of he gets bullied into becoming a cop in the space of about a page, which as we always say, there's a lot going on, but I don't. That was in one bit that's kind of stretched my kind of suspension of disbelief slightly, but I'm being very nitpicky there, very
Yeah,
nitpicky.
I'm thinking of a scene in Babylon 5 where I've tried not to spoil it, where they're operating independently, and because they're getting boycotted, um, the sub commander of the station rounds up all the petty thieves and the mob bosses, and then gets them to bring in the stuff that they can't get through customs because of the boycott. Gets them to lend their mobs to doing repairs on the engines, and if if we make it worthwhile for you to operate here, then we won't arrest you and flush you out in airlock.
Yeah,
Everybody wins.
there's
Uh,
something. Yeah, there is
yeah.
something quite like more porky about that storyline in Babylon 5, actually. Uh, I wasn't expecting us to go there. I did a rewatch relatively recently too. Yeah, well, that we'll have to save that for another podcast
I,
potentially.
I think that element of it sort of does ease it over, and let, yeah, let's be kinder. I mean, Coalface is a pretty contentious figure in the politics. He's been scapegoated for this murder. Um,
Yeah,
at the
yeah.
request of Cork.
And that
Um,
again, but even and that is part of what makes it feel that the 180 where he's just been wrongfully arrested by the watch and then turns around and joins the watch essentially does just yeah, I mean it's a very slight nitpick, but it does feel like a little bit of a stretch, I guess.
hmm.
Do you know? Because in his eyes, are Carrot and Quirk really that different?
Well, he ain't done nothing wrong.
I ain't done nothing. You ain't done nothing. Gosh, what's that accent? Stop, please stop. Uh, oh, just speaking of Babylon 5 and and Garibaldi and all that, something actually just sparked something that I wanted to talk about Vimes. I think the portrayal of Vimes is a drinking problem, I guess, for want of a better word. I'm not sure if he's ever really acknowledges the fact that he's like a full-blown alcoholic, but like he's for sure got a drinking problem. I think is handled in quite a real, mature sort of way in this book, and like Vimes falls off the wagon, but he doesn't fall off the wagon in this like big cartoonish or comedic way. Like it feels quite grounded and real, and has quite a serious effect on the character's perspective of himself, which yeah, I find like from our cultural perspective, like alcoholism looms quite large, I guess, in many people's families and stuff like that. And I find the portrayal of it in Discworld really grounded. And I have a habit of like it's something I include in my own writing, probably a little bit too much. And I think I'm always trying to write it the way Terry writes it with truth, And this is the first time because guards, he's drunk at the start, he's got a job to do, and we never come back to it. And then seeing Vimes fall off the wagon is like when you don't know how everything else is going to go. Like, I'd be interested to hear like how those kind of scenes. Did you think, well, this is it for Vimes? Like, he's back drinking, he's getting married, like he's just not going to be a guard anymore. Like, he's lost that side of himself. Did you feel like that was ever a real possibility, or?
I think there's a lot of interesting stuff we get about Vimes in this piece. I mean, I mentioned earlier that I felt there wasn't as much of Vimes in this book as there should be. There's a lot of development of Vimes, but most of it happens off the page.
Mm,
Um, there's a couple of really good scenes that I should put in my description. Actually, the one I'm going to hone in on is Angu and Carrot visiting Vimes' his room, and Angu's just really being nosy and asking about the women he's paid money to, and it turns out to be widows of police officers.
yeah, and if I
Um,
recall correctly, Vimes is sleeping off a hangover at this point, like when that discovery is made. So you're like, yes, he's tried to be on this good path. He has fallen off it, but then yeah, they discover this other virtuous side to him that had previously been unknown. And yeah, it's quite poignant. That whole like as you say, there's not it's quality over quantity though with Vimes in this book. I think everything we do learn about him is really valuable and is really well told. Actually, I'm a huge Vimes apologist. Like he's easily what my top three, if not my favorite Discworld character. So yeah.
where are we? Room of
Oh, I
Eggs.
want to talk about the room full of eggs,
Yeah.
actually, before we do that, because who
Uh,
wouldn't want to talk about a room full of eggs? So again, thanks to the annotated Discworld, we know that this idea is real. So
As in a basis in our reality?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, elaborate.
It's what clowns really do to copyright their face. Yeah, apparently. I implicitly trust the annotated Discworld. I
Citation.
would never ever, no, I would never question, never ever question. I'll say, I'll call up.
So
Yeah,
there's a room somewhere with eggs and they've all been painted, except one of them is bare, and this is the killer. And so we're introducing a new segment today called Egg Time.
yeah, we should. Um, I do feel challenged. I feel like I have to defend the honor of annotated Discworld. Okay, yeah, here we go.
Egg
Uh,
Time.
Clowns, egg time. Clowns' faces are trademarked and cannot be copied by any other clown, unlike clothes or specific act. If you are a clown, you can send a photograph of your face to the clown and character registry, where the face is then painted on a goose egg, a tradition dating back to the 1500s and stored. So I guess we would have to look up the clown and character registry just to like absolutely nail that, but that's enough information for me for now.
Okay, if you're watching the video version of that, and I'm going to put at least one visual on screen, please go and like tweet out about this fact or the show in general, because
Absolutely. I mean,
rocking my world right now.
I have a feeling like I did have my memory jogged about that. It's the reason I wanted to call up the annotated Discworld for this book specifically because I think I did see somebody tweeting about that recently, and I was like, oh yeah, that's a Discworld thing. But of course, if it's a Discworld thing, Terry has such a wide variety of inspiration. Um,
I
okay,
fancy an egg in this trying time.
yeah, that's the crossover we need. Yeah, Frank in Discworld, like Frank is like he's the Nobby Knobs is the Frank of Discworld already, actually, isn't he? All right, part five. Dartboard. The Discworld moves for Corporal Carrot. Detritus gets a clockwork cooler. Wedding guests gather at Unseen University, and Veterinary comes under fire. Angua and Gaspode face off against the Dogs Guild. Vimes battles an unforeseen assailant at the Tower of Art, and the Patrician is outflanked at the palace. Body count. Got to pour one out. Pour one out for acting Constable Cuddy, and then
Right.
also Dr. Cruces, because yeah, that's who did it. There you go. That's who did it. And also the gun. I feel like the gun because it was sort of a bit anthropomorphized, wasn't it? It spoke and stuff, and then it
The
dies
gun's
too.
gone, allegedly.
The gun is gone. Yeah. Uh, yeah. Got to talk about the Dogs Guild.
Right.
Got to talk about the Dogs Guild.
And both hilarious and terrifying.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, bear with me a second.
The fact that they exist is the funniest part of it. In the way that they exist, there's almost like a little it's a little sort of, I was going to say communist, but authoritarian rebellion going on here.
Yeah. So
Big Fido, who is a poodle, if I
love
remember
that so
right.
much. And the poodle, the cut has kind of grown out, and he's like this sort of half feral poodle, but he's still wearing a collar. Uh, Such a vivid image. It's great. And sometimes like these little asides, because like the Dogs Guild don't have like a big impact on the A story or whatever, and you know, thinking about we were both a bit critical of like the Morris Men asides in the last book, but like the Dogs Guild are just such a microcosm of the themes of authoritarianism, I guess, as you say, and of political extremism, which again, thinking about all the kind of the themes in this book that we might connect to, as people from the place that we're from. The portrayal of it is just really, really well observed because, like, yeah, nobody's been around more political extremists than people from Northern Ireland. Um, Big Fido just feels like a real character, doesn't he? Just feels like a particular person of like a who's at the extreme of a particular political opinion, and an Angua who comes in as an outsider and is just like just sees how messed up this is straight away. Just like and wolves are such a good metaphor for it as well because like they talk about themselves like, oh we're wolves, wolves wouldn't do this, wolves wouldn't do that, and Angua's just like you guys don't know this Fido character does nothing about what real wolves are like, and the real tangible connection there is that like the whole idea of like an alpha male wolf, from what I understand from my single science GCSE, the concept of an alpha wolf doesn't exist in the wild. So like this idea that you can be an alpha male isn't even real. It's not based on like real nature. And so the fact that these dogs have embraced this and created this kind of false identity around it, I think like yeah, we see that so much in identity politics in general now, like across the world, and something that we're obviously unfortunately deeply experienced with locally as well. So like I find that stuff great. I also find Gaspod's reaction to it all. Like Gaspod is terrified of this poodle. That's just like
So I,
despite all these serious themes, like that's just hilarious. Like
I wasn't sure about it because this is quite economically told. We get a mention of the guild, maybe twice at most,
Mhm.
and we get to see them in relatively benign circumstances, although I think that ends with an execution. And
Yeah,
then, and
benign
then
circumstances except for the execution. Yeah, sure.
the execution, and then the chase sequence sometime after.
Yeah,
And we have Gaspel telling Angua through the way that it's okay, he's in tight with Big Fido because he's special C. And so I wasn't sure because
mm,
Gaspard can talk. He can still talk despite the moving pictures having moved on.
yeah.
Um,
Best not to dwell on that, but yeah.
so, but certainly by the time we get to the chase, he's not too popular.
Yeah, and the fact that he can tell them that they're bad dogs, he has the power, and the power ends up being telling them that they're bad dogs with a
Yeah.
human voice, and it just like messes them up. That will always be funny. I feel like I've seen that a bunch in like other media as well, but I don't know if any of it would predate this. So I'm gonna give Terry credit for the whole bad dog causing psychological damage to dogs. I love it. Um,
Reminded of that Doctor Who scene where it's in what is it, The Empty Child, the Doctor dances, where Christopher Eccleston tells the gas mask children to go to their rooms,
yeah, yeah,
which
and
just
that
settles the threat.
has power. Yeah, like yeah. Those kind of something that's like ingrained in your subconscious. Yeah. Uh, so then, in terms of bringing it home, bringing the procedural home, like the revelations that it's Doctor Crucius has kind of taken the mantle on from Edward, and
Yeah, well, I wasn't sure. I had actually fingered Dr. Whiteface of the rules.
yeah, yeah, I think like there's definitely implications. Like you want that though. I mean, you need these multiple suspects,
Do you think
otherwise.
he was involved, or is it just a red herring for the reader?
Oh, I think a red herring, yeah, but a really credible one, like really well set up red herring for sure. Yeah, I would agree with that, and it's almost like a double bluff because you're thinking you're trying to solve this mystery, so you're like, oh, if it's between the assassin and the fool, it's got to be the fool because the assassin's too obvious. But then
Yeah.
it's a double bluff, and I think again the fact that he keeps coming back to the assassins for kind of story engine and that somebody like Dr. Crucis would be incapable of destroying the gun. Again, I feel like the veterinary would be kind of smart enough to know that. Like, did he give it to them thinking that actually they weren't going to destroy it, but at least it would be safe just in case he ever needed it, or because
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree that he kind of should have been a lot smarter about this.
unless
He
it's
really let
like
himself
yeah,
down there.
plans within plans or wheels within wheels. But then he ended up being the target of an assassination with it. Just shows you that like it does have a life of its own and people can't control it. It's this power that kind of overtakes people.
So that was a fairly high action drama scene at the wedding where we get the Unseen University, a nice little cameo by those guys.
That was cool.
Um, yeah, high action drama, and it's perfectly described. You can picture it. You've got a little movie going in your mind,
Hmm, hmm.
and then to the Tower of Art, the standoff there, Cuddy's death. God damn it. That's revenge for the gas boat thing, isn't it?
I guess
Um,
it kind of is. Yeah, I guess it kind of is. Which is, yeah.
it was yeah, it really felt like I will miss Cuddy. Um, I would like to see more of him.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's interesting that yeah, that set piece is great, and it's followed by another really meaty, well written chase sequence. There's a lot of chase sequences in this book, right? Like I'm all for them. It's great, but I hadn't really realized it till just now where like the dogs are doing it. Cuddy and Detritus get chased at one point.
Yeah,
Guards are chasing crooks. Crooks are chasing guards. Like
this is a blockbuster. This would be a good one for a live action or animated adaptation.
be expensive. That's for a different episode. Well, we'll do a deep dive into the TV side of things maybe someday. So Angua Carrot also comes to. I don't know how to describe this without being dirty. I was going to say comes to fruition, which sounds a bit dirty. But
Fruity.
yes, indeed. But it's nice. It's nice to kind of see, the cute kids get together despite everything, despite the
They
whole
got it
werewolf
like
thing.
cat and dog.
Oof, oh gosh,
I just pull that off
maybe.
the accent. Cat
Yeah,
and dog.
maybe.
Yeah.
And like the whole thing about Carrot kind of drawing his sword on her when she turns into a werewolf, it's quite sad actually. Like you sort of feel her pain in that moment, and like it's the first time really you feel that like Carrot does something wrong. Like has Carrot ever done anything wrong before?
Yeah, actually, I hadn't really thought about that, but it's all there in the text. The point of Gaspo does speak for Terry a lot in how freaked out she must have or he must have been,
Yeah, yeah,
and likewise how she must have
yeah.
felt.
It's a really hard thing to write. And obviously Terry's a genius, and that's why it works. But like to put two characters in a situation where it's really clear why they're at odds with each other, but that we can completely understand both of their positions. Like you just said, it's completely understandable why Carrot draws his sword when he sees a werewolf in his bed, and it's also completely understandable why Angua feels hurt and betrayed by that because they live in a world where werewolves are a thing. So yeah, I think it's really well handled, and the fact that it doesn't pay off, that incident happens quite late, and then obviously has to pay off by the end. I think it's quite a tricky thing considering everything else that's going on in the book, but I think that they handled it really well, and it's just a testament to how well realized those two characters are throughout the book leading up to this moment. And I know, yeah, I'm surprised. Maybe again, it's a bit of baggage from other books, but like I really like Angua as a character, and this being her introduction and her vulnerability, kind of with Carrot, I think is the key that unlocks that. That really puts you as a reader on her side.
Uh,
But
a
yeah,
far
but
a far pettier point. You've reminded me of the Return of Red Shoe and Mrs. Cake. Don't make
yeah, yeah,
Mrs.
of
Cake.
course, yeah. Because we did talk about zombies and rage and stuff in that last time out, and just that little like just with a line or two here and there, there's that really subtle world building that yeah, sprinkle a little sprinkling, little seeds that might grow again in later books. It just makes Ankh-Morpork feel like such a real exciting place to be.
Can we talk about the Gone again? The animated Gone. Now this uh, this is a great book for re resonation. It works even when you're not reading it after you've read it. It
Mm,
becomes stronger. And I felt initially a little bit of sort of, oh right, so it's a gun, but it's a magical gun. Does it need to be a magical gun? But then if it's a magic, that's a gun. So guns can't really be magical because there's nothing magical about guns. And um, but it is to do with I think what you were hinting at earlier, muscle memory. And despite us like growing up in a war zone, we all went out in the streets and like lifted branches or lifted our arms and like, oh, how cool we looked holding a gun. It was all the television we consumed.
mm,
It's
yeah.
that thing like smoking. It's really a terrible way to think, but
Yeah, I
I
was
think
telling the
it's
story to
cool as
somebody.
well.
Yeah, I was telling the story to somebody quite recently. I can't remember exactly why. Um, but since we were kind of talking about that period, late 90s, the agreement and the disbandment of the REC and all that stuff, um, So around that time, I think it might have actually been just pre-agreement, like the RUC and the British Army, who were very much still a presence in Belfast at that time, were going around Catholic schools, like school I went to try to like be more visible and more approachable to young nationalists, I guess. So they came to school and like our school wasn't super rough, but it wasn't like super nice either. So you had this room full of like teenage Irish nationalists with a British, I think he was like a lieutenant at the front and an RUC officer as well at the front. So there's like a lot of sniping going along, a lot of people swearing under their breath and like, giving it all this, like acting the big man. And then at the end, the army guy brought out his gun, which was completely made safe. He didn't have any bullets on his person. Everybody has a gun. And he let whoever wanted to come up and hold it. And all of a sudden, they were all on his side. Like all the hard men went down to like to do this, to hold this gun, and to like And rereading this book, it just made me think of that and just be like, there is something a little bit magical. Is not the word, but like they do have power more so than like a sword or like something else. Like just the fact that like this guy who was like these kids, he was the mortal enemy of these kids until he let them play with a gun, basically.
Is the
That always
word,
stuck with
is
me,
the,
man.
I'm trying to think, it's the word animus. So animus means hate, but
Mm,
also, is that the word given over to something inanimate that has an
that has
animated
power. Yeah, yeah.
characteristic?
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
Certainly
Yeah,
anima is on the right track.
yeah. So I think having had that experience and I'm having dredged it up for some other reason quite recently. Yeah, when the gun starts acting on its own accord, essentially, that just feels to me like the extension of that metaphor, that the way that ideas do become real in Discworld, that felt, oh yeah, actually in the same way that the moving pictures that they became real, the idea of a gun and firepower and the effect that that could have on the world, because the way it talks to Vimes, that like he wants to make the world better. I could help you clean up these streets, Dirty Harry style, like.
There's something very I don't know, Marshall McLuhan about it, where the sort of the technology takes on its own, like, this is what it got me thinking of. If you go and look at McLuhan's tetrad of media, that media does four things obsolete. Can you remember this?
No, no, no.
Obsolete and makes what came before it obsolete, and it has all these characteristics. But basically, yes, it's about how we respond to technology and whether we are prepared for the changes that the technology we've invented are going to bring to our society and our very souls. And
Mm.
yeah, I've got to think.
Yeah, this feels like a really clear rumination on those themes. I mean, for that generation, that so Terry's born in the 1940s, so like even his father would have been born before the First World War, before the kind of this scourge of pain and death that could be inflicted, I guess, with weapons like this, that still feels like a relatively recent development in human history, I guess, in the mid 20th century, let's say.
It's like 120 years ago, we had the plane was a brand new thing. It wasn't around the world yet. Tanks,
Hmm.
nuclear bombs. There's yeah, so much has happened in the time of your great grandparents, like since
Yeah,
then.
if even the kind of, not to get too personal, but like the vagaries of like my family line. So like I was actually born, my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, was born 100 years before me. So he was born before the invention of any of that stuff. He fought in the Boer War,
Wow.
you know. So like, um, yeah, it's like the amount of change, mind-boggling change over the course of that century and a half now, I guess, is I think what he's kind of remarking on here with like we haven't stopped to consider like the how this has affected our minds, like how this has affected our willingness to inflict pain however we justify it. Like if somebody like Vimes can be corrupted by this, then like what hope is there for the rest of us?
Yeah, we need to steer this ship better.
Indeed, yeah.
All right.
Where's Where's Sam Bymes when we need him for sure? Or where's Captain Carrot? Where's Carrot when we need him? Because it's Carrot who ultimately diffuses that situation, isn't it? So yeah,
On the card in the final scene, well, final substantial scene, and one of my favorites is Carrot's request for a dartboard and a
yeah.
kettle, and was it 56 extra troops and 10 stations? And this is really interesting. Well, I mean, the substance of it is fascinating. Just the battle of wits that goes on between them, and they are actually really well, well poised with one another.
I think they are. Yeah, they're surprisingly evenly matched. I think that's very fair to say because a recurring thing, a couple of characters stated outright, I think, that Carrot is simple but not stupid. And this is that, or that's all built into this confrontation with the Patrician, who's anything but. He's probably the most complex mind, with the possible exception of Leonard.
And Carrot just has him over a barrel politically. I mean, they saved the guy's life.
And
So
it's
Carrot can play
interesting,
the game.
yeah, and I think there is that moment, very, very brief moment of vulnerability when Carrot arrives and the Patrician thinks that he's there to overthrow the government. Carrot's there to take power. There's like I think when he first enters, he's like, I assume you're here to make demands, and it's like he's demanding the throne. Like I think Veterinary expects Carrot to demand the throne, and then he demands the kettle instead. It's just glorious. It's such a great moment, and I think we all know in our hearts that Carrot isn't gonna do it, but we always like to see Veterinary squirm because it happens so rarely. Such a great moment. Yeah, great scene. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because
I'm
there's
trying.
a few different kind of endings here because that feels like one for Carrot assuming his uh, commission as a captain in the watch, and then the next step is bringing Vimes back in as
Yeah.
commander.
It's really interesting to me, actually. I don't know if I mentioned this to you when we were doing guards, but my perception of what the guards books were going to be was like a city watch, day watch type idea of a big,
Yeah,
not this little foursome of pathetic underdogs.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But now we've actually come, it looks like we've come to the point where that's the evolution of what I thought.
It's such a long running series. There's so many books in it that like it's kind of good that it did start in that place because it gives the watch as a series like further to go, I guess, in its trajectory, get more mileage out of it that way. But yeah, yeah, this book, especially by the end, this sequence you're describing now feels like the watch has arrived, like the real watch in my view, or in my mind as well. I would consider it that way too. And it's great to see Vimes just like jump back in, both feet. Sybil can tell that he's never going to be happier than when he's doing this kind of work, and doesn't even have to be spoken as husband and wife. They don't even have to have a conversation about it. She just walks out of the room, just leaves him to it. Uh,
Yeah, you can tell Ramkin's all on board for that.
yeah, yeah, it's great. And then
And how he takes over Carrot's line of conversation by just doing all the directing, the strategizing.
yeah,
Yeah, he kind of he knows, like more pork, he knows what needs to be done, and yeah. As soon as the offer's made, it's the plan.
yeah. And again, like you were saying, like all
But
those kind of moments in the story where Vimes isn't maybe as present as he was saying Guards Cars, and we are maybe thinking, yeah, maybe he's gonna retire. Maybe this is it for him. So then this scene where you just see him like you say, he's able to bounce off Carrot's ideas and just start growing it, and he's so into it and he's so happy that you just like you're so glad that he's not gonna retire. And like, why did you even care about that? But this is such a nice cathartic payoff for it. And then that only really leaves Cuddy's funeral and the fate of the gun. So I can't take credit for this. I didn't pick up on it first, second, or third time I read it, but I think it's on annotated Discworld or possibly on Reddit. I was reading about the theory that Carrot has buried Cuddy with the gun.
yes, just now you're talking about it, I remember that being my interpretation.
Yeah, good to know. That's good. Okay, great, good. So I haven't pulled this out of nowhere because I think it's mentioned further up when they're talking about the other dwarf who's murdered, that a dwarf has to be buried with a mighty weapon. And we all have such love for Cuddy, and it's such a heart wrencher when he dies that like we want this dwarf is going to go to the afterlife with like the mightiest weapon that ever was, you know. So to bury him with the gun, definitely didn't clock it. I don't think any time I read it, but then it feels so right
Yeah.
that I can't
Yeah,
imagine
like
any
no,
other
I'm
explanation now.
still, I know it must really pain you for me to put this question out there, but I'm wondering, are there going to be more guns in Discworld? But
You know,
for
I
the
can't answer
idea
that.
of whatever happens next, yeah, this one being buried with Cuddy, yeah, absolutely is a right.
Yeah, 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 and then all the stuff with Carrot and all the evidence about him being king, you know, and he's obviously just mislaid that in the way that he mislaid the gun. So yeah, I think a big part of why I didn't maybe engage with this one, because when I think back to the initial trilogy, I think, you know, Guards, Men at Arms, Feet of Clay. Guards and Feet of Clay are the two that I probably revisited most, and not so much this one. And I think part of that was I found it a little bit difficult to to visualize the gun, like to just physically visualize it. Like, so this time round, I went and did a bit of looking up, like, because they talk about the six tubes all in a line, and I couldn't figure that out. Like, was that? It's not obviously not a revolver, but it's not. It's not like a magazine like you would load into an assault rifle. So like, yeah, I did a bit of research and looked into like all these old designs, harmonica guns they call them, where like the magazine was fed in sideways, and I think that's what it is. I assume you've done your cover research as usual. I think I saw a reference to the fact that Josh Kirby kind of nails the design on it on the back of the book. So I don't know if you've looked closely enough to see it, because I read my electronic version
I've
again.
not
So
really looked at the covers. I think there's a couple of Kirby. Oh yes, so let's see. Yeah, I'll get that up on screen. But I do like the. I don't know if you can make that out. I
yeah,
Kirby
you've nailed it.
cover this time. It's very economical, like the story itself. We've
Yeah.
got the recruitment on the front page, and then the shooter on the back
Yeah.
with the description.
And that totally passed me by because as I say, I had such a mental block about picturing it, and it was right there on the cover the whole time. So I don't know how I managed to miss that one. So that one's all on me. Terry and Josh did their best to get me on board, and I fluffed it. So great book, great book. So excited to do more watch. So excited to arrive at the Discworld that is the most complete version that exists in my imagination. You know.
Shall we round it up and talk about favorite scenes and quotes?
Yeah, let's do it.
I'm just going to read out from my script here because I've got a lot of favorite scenes. Detritus getting brainy and Cuddy's enhanced loyalty to him. The final scene between Carrot and Vetinari and Leonard de Quirm. I effing adore the descriptors clutching coffee. The human orangutan dictionary, which has got as far as ook. Tracing bodies on the sheer bloody terror that is a Gone. It's generally threatened, reaches a modern horror that no cosmic ghoulie of genre can replicate. I think for the scene and quote that rises above the rest, I think it has to be the rather obvious one, and that's Bime's socio-economic theory, which somehow we've not managed to talk about. It was really weird seeing it here, but because it's been so memed and it's been it feels so memed. It's such like a big thing, but reading it in context, it's almost like a little throwaway. But yeah, that's it for me. And it's a lot shorter than I remember as well.
Yeah, because it would again easily
Look up the quotes page.
the quote that sticks out the most. And actually, the way I was chatting before, you know, the trilogy, the first three books do bleed together a little bit for me, and I did have it in my head that the socioeconomic theory of Boots was in Feet of Clay, and then I was sort of pleasantly surprised to see it pop up here because it actually makes a lot more sense. You know, all those are actually quite brief. There's only a couple of scenes with Vimes interacting with like the upper classes and like what Terry has to say about class in this book. I think is surprisingly subtle, and the fact that this quote about Boots is now out there in the world and it's this meme as you say. But yeah, because that would have been my pick for a quote as well. So I'll just read it out, I guess. The reason that the rich were so rich, Vimes reasoned, was because they managed to spend less money. Take boots, for example. A really good pair of leather boots cost $50, but an affordable pair of boots, which were sort of okay for a season or two, and then leaked like hell when the cardboard came out, cost about $10. But the thing was, the good boots lasted for years and years. A man who could afford $50 had a pair of boots that would still be keeping his feet dry in 10 years' time, while a poor man who could only afford cheap boots would have spent $100 on boots in the same time and would still have wet feet. And every time I read that, like as you say, it's been memed to death. I've reread this book a bunch of times. It comes up all the time. Every time I read it, like it still gets me. Like it still makes me angry every time I read it. Every time, you know. And that's just the power of these books. Like,
The Captain Samuel Vine's Boots Theory of Social Economic Unfairness.
mm,
Yeah, I've been up and down the financial ladder a few times, and I've you know that you seem to be going forever where you're making a pound trying to stretch into like £20, or
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
you're
absolutely.
trying to get by each day, and your clothes are a wreck. And
Yeah.
yeah,
When I
boots
dipped into
boots
the
is where it comes, because it comes up from the rain in this place.
Yeah, totally. And I dipped my toe briefly, not that well. For 2 or 3 years, I worked in the gig economy, doing bicycle food deliveries, and you saw that there so much. Like if nobody doing that job could afford the right kit, like if you had the money for like good cycling gear or like good, to keep your bike in good nick or whatever, then like you wouldn't be doing this job 'cause you wouldn't need the money, and all those like hidden fees that like working class people get hit with. Like if you wanted, because you were technically self-employed doing this work, if you wanted to draw your wages down as you earned them, there was like an admin fee for that instead of waiting for your arbitrary invoice date that the company decided. All these little ways. So yeah, working people get hit with these fees that the rich people don't even know exist.
We had a UK-wide business called Shoe Zone, which has disappeared recently,
Oh,
where you can
I
essentially, it's
remember
a
that.
bargain books of shoes,
Yeah,
shoes for £15, and it's very much a sort of the boots that, yeah, they'll do you, but you're gonna get holes in them. And like I've got a new pair of boots, a second-hand pair, or discounted pair, not second-hand, about 4 weeks ago. But I spent a fair bit of trudging around town, looking for shoes on, finding out they'd gone into administration, wondering where I can get shoes from now that I can afford. Um, and it's just, yeah, I'm feeling it more and more in this time of Conservative Party austerity. We have to dance to whatever
hmm,
their tune they're playing. Like I've holding down two jobs, but I still have to go to the job centre
yeah.
to get the tax credits I'm legally entitled to as a taxpayer. That'll help on top of my wages just to get by on. And it's your monthly reporting of your income. I'm preaching to the choir, I sense. Certainly with you,
Oh,
Pete.
totally. Yeah, completely. Yeah, like the fact that you basically have a third job on top of your two other jobs just to make sure that you can keep your head above water is an absolute travesty. And as that's kind of what I mean, I guess, like when every time I read this, like, yeah, it does still make me angry because it's still so relevant, to so many people's lives, including ours. I notice actually here as I read the Wikipedia page, because I'm cheating, I'm reading the Wikipedia page about Vimes' the socioeconomic theory of unfairness. Our old buddy Mark Burrows has obviously done more digging on this than either of us because he's better at this than we are. He has theorized that Terry drew inspiration from Robert Tressel's 1914 novel, The Ragged Trousered Philanthropists. In the book Fashion in the Fairy Tale Tradition, Rebecca Ann C. Do Rosario argues shoes and economic autonomy are inextricably linked, in fairy tales, citing the boots theory as particularly relevant and an insightful metaphor for inequality. So there's a bit of context to that.
Interesting. My other reading at the moment is Asimov on science fiction, which is a really
Yeah,
interesting, more than a writer's guide. It's about people, and it's about how people share stories. And Asimov is writing in his history of SF. He says early science fiction mags of the 20s, amazing stories and wonder stories,
yeah,
made use of footnotes, and he's talking in terms of adventure stories.
yeah.
This
Wow.
was part of a sort of a attempt to galvanize parents to let their children read SF mags under the auspices of them being educational in regards to science. So if you give them a bit of a sort of a hint of the academia, you can.
Yeah,
But
that, oh
so
yeah, it makes it a bit more credible. Yeah, that's fascinating.
yeah.
Absolutely fascinating.
So I'm wondering if Terry saw these, if that was
Well, yeah,
something.
from reading the biogs, like I mean, he was going to sci-fi conventions from like a very early age as a teenager and stuff. He would have been plugged right into that stuff, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I think this was pretty much discontinued after the 20s, but certainly with the sci-fi fan sort of
Yeah, like he
stories
was
are
very
told
immersed in that
in that
subculture. Yeah,
circuit,
yeah,
and
yeah, for sure.
there's almost there seems to be a very family-like hand stories down generation
Mm,
to generation within sci-fi fan.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And I
Certain brands of or types of sci-fi fandom, the more
indeed.
sort of official, organized. It can never
Yeah,
be.
I must get back to the biographies. I've been slacking off on my non-fiction reading. And yeah, you're reading of Asimov. That's definitely it's given me a bit more inspiration to go back to that stuff.
I have a
Cool.
plug to do as well.
Do it, man. Do
We
it.
almost didn't get on tonight, but we got saved our bacon with Zoom. So I have to say this episode was sponsored by Ian Lawther, King of the Universe. Bow down and worship minions and loyal subjects. Thank you, Ian.
Fair. I
And
mean,
thank
if
you
he
to my Patreon patrons, Art K and Arslan Hyder Ali. I want to plug my YouTube channel again, youtube.com/@ Andrew Luke, which is showing weekly Sunny reviews. And I guess by the time this airs, we'll be doing micro reviews of Doctor Who on a weekly
awesome.
basis. And I'm really, really proud of them. I'm really excited about the new series coming up.
Yeah, likewise, I've got catching up to do, but yeah, jumping on a few of Andy's reviews, I think will help with that. That's going to be fun. I think it's probably my last call for pitching my radio documentary, and if you miss it live at 7:15 on Sunday, the 21st of April, on Radio 4. If for some reason you're not sitting down by the fireside listening to Radio 4, you can catch John Maher's The Devil Zone on BBC Sounds. I think from about 8 o'clock that night, you'll be able to find it. Find it there. So yeah, I look forward to finally being
Fantastic.
able to stop thinking about that. As great a show as it is, as fascinating as it is, a lot of the stuff that we talked around today about the complicated history of Northern Ireland is dealt with in that program from a really different perspective. That's a little bit funny, a little bit interesting, and a little bit surreal. So I think it might appeal to some Discworld fans out there who are interested in that stuff, if there are any. So I'd be really cool to hear what people think about that, actually. That's it.
And just on it, I really love so much. I feel so gratified by your interaction that it's like it's fantastic just being PJ talking here, but that so many of you are along for this ride with me as a new reader, maybe as new readers yourselves, maybe not for the whole series, maybe just a few books, or just visiting some old favorites. Um, so thanks a lot for making this a much bigger thing and
Yeah, seconded.
for
Yeah.
sharing what we're doing here.
Yeah, it's been great revisiting all this. It's just actually just sitting down with a Discworld every month has become such a comfort blanket. You know, it's such a joy, and then getting to have the chat with you guys and with Andy every month is just the icing on the cake. So yeah, that feels like a suitably heartwarming place to leave things. Would you say? Got anything else to plug? Any other shameless capitalism to take the shine off that?
I guess just the Twitter at Discord GNU, and Facebook at Discord GNU. Next month we are doing, what are we doing, PJ?
I think we'll do the Weird Sisters animation, perhaps,
I've
just
been
for a
wanting
little
to
change of
see
pace.
that for a while. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
things get a bit hectic for both of us, I guess, towards the end of term time. So it's nice to kick back with the cartoon instead of a full-length novel. And I think it's something we've probably teased enough, like we've mentioned it a couple of times, that we might go and do stuff like that. So this time we're really gonna do it.
yep.
We're gonna go watch the animation of Weird Sisters. We'll give you guys some thoughts on that. I think it can be. I edit this out if it's not true, but I think it can be found on YouTube quite readily. So if you haven't seen it before, go check it out. It's a wonderful animated adaptation. I think it was originally put out on Channel 4, Andy. We'll get all the real
I think
details
so.
for next month when we do the pod for real. Go out, check it out. It's really wonderful. I haven't seen it for many, many years, at least 20 years, so I'm looking forward to revisiting that. Andy hasn't seen it ever, of course. That's our shtick. So join us for that. We think it's going to be a lot of fun.
That'll give you a bit more time and us to read the next book, which we're not going to name right now.
Oh, we're not? Yeah, maybe we won't.
Yeah,
I mean,
let's
you can
just
look it up.
keep these a bit more sort of. You can watch this podcast in any order you want and rewatch it.
It's a fair point.
There's
Fair point.
set ways. People have different ways to watch our podcast, and it's good to try them all.
Maybe one day I'll sit down and work out the PJ reading order, like the really unhelpful roundabout way that I first read this girl, that if anybody wants to attempt that order and if they manage to read the whole series, I think they would win a prize. I don't think that's a goer. All right. I'm running out of steam. I'm on empty. I'm out.
Thanks very much. Take care. I will talk to you next month or in a few minutes.
Indeed. A pleasure.